Some people never lift a hand and still leave wreckage behind them. They do it with flattery, with quiet manipulation, with a slow starvation of another person's spirit. The most dangerous figure in any room is rarely the one shouting the loudest. Often it is the calm one, the charming one, the one who leaves everyone else doubting their own memory, their own sanity, their own worth. Today we're going to unpack why people with narcissistic patterns leave a trail of fractured families, drained friendships, poisoned workplaces, and crushed self-esteem everywhere they go, and why the true damage has almost nothing to do with vanity or ego in the way most people assume. Have you ever known someone who could light up an entire room, who could charm strangers within minutes, and yet somehow leave the people closest to them feeling hollow, exhausted, unseen? Someone who always seemed to be the injured party, who always needed to be admired, who somehow made everyone else responsible for their moods and their misery. If that sounds painfully familiar, stay with this. By the time we're finished, you'll understand the hidden architecture behind this behavior. The reason narcissists don't merely stir up conflict, but slowly and methodically reshape the emotional climate of everyone around them until trust dissolves, confidence collapses, and even a person's grip on reality begins to loosen. On the surface, narcissists often seem consumed by confidence, ambition, or a hunger for superiority, but underneath that polished exterior sits something far more fragile, an overwhelming, almost desperate need to protect a carefully constructed self-image. Their deepest priority isn't truth, it isn't connection, it is the preservation of an identity that must be admired, validated, and never questioned. This is why they so often choose the appearance of things over the substance of them. If admitting an error threatens the image they've built, they will deny it outright, rewrite the sequence of events, or quietly shift the blame onto someone else's shoulders. To them, being perceived as flawed feels more dangerous than actually being flawed. Their choices are steered less by what is accurate and more by whatever keeps their fragile self-concept intact. This distortion doesn't stay contained. It bleeds into every interaction. Conversations stop being exchanges and start becoming performances. They listen only long enough to find their next opening, a chance to defend themselves, redirect the spotlight, or pivot back to their own achievements, hardships, or importance. Real accountability becomes almost impossible because accepting responsibility means acknowledging a flaw, and a flaw is treated as a direct threat to the identity they have spent years constructing. Even mild, well-intentioned feedback can land like an assault, triggering rage, stonewalling, or calculated retaliation. Where a healthy person might ask, "Is this true?" the narcissist instead asks, "How does this make me look?" And so reality itself becomes negotiable in their minds. Facts are discarded the instant they threaten the preferred narrative. Promises are abandoned the moment they stop being convenient. Memories are quietly edited, revised, and reshaped so the narcissist always emerges in the better light. They inflate their triumphs, erase their failures, and slip effortlessly into the role of victim whenever it serves their image. This relentless distortion forces everyone nearby into a strange, corrosive position, doubting their own eyes, their own recollection, their own sense of what actually happened. Partners, relatives, co-workers, friends, all of them slowly start to question their memory because the narcissist insists with total conviction on a different version of events. Over time, every relationship in that person's orbit begins to revolve around protecting the narcissist's identity rather than nurturing mutual respect or emotional safety. Truth becomes worthless the moment it competes with image, and trust erodes away completely because the people around them come to realize they aren't dealing with an authentic human being. They're dealing with a carefully guarded illusion that must be defended at any price. One of the clearest markers of narcissistic behavior is a fundamental failure to see other people as full human beings with their own needs, histories, and inner lives. Instead, people are quietly filed away as extensions of the self, as tools with a specific function. Every relationship is unconsciously reduced to a single silent question: what can this person do for me? If someone offers admiration, status, opportunity, comfort, or practical advantage, they are welcomed warmly and kept close. But the instant their usefulness fades, or the instant they begin voicing independent thoughts, the relationship shifts, often abruptly. Affection turns conditional. Respect evaporates. Emotional distance sets in like a slow frost. This mindset makes genuine emotional connection almost impossible to sustain. Healthy relationships rest on mutual appreciation, empathy, and respect for each person's individuality. A narcissist, by contrast, struggles to grant others that kind of equal standing. Instead, people become sources of attention, of validation, of comfort, of control. Friends turn into an audience. Partners become suppliers of admiration. Co-workers are recast as rivals or as stepping stones toward personal advancement. Even family members can be reduced to reflections of the narcissist's reputation rather than being cherished as individuals who deserve unconditional care. Because of this, love in these dynamics often feels transactional rather than sincere. Kindness arrives with strings attached, an unspoken expectation of praise, loyalty, or future repayment. The moment someone stops fulfilling their assigned role, disappointment curdles quickly into criticism or outright rejection. A partner who once received a constant stream of compliments may suddenly be branded selfish or inadequate simply because they started enforcing healthy boundaries. A devoted friend who dares to question dishonest behavior can instantly be recast as an enemy. This whiplash feels disorienting because the narcissist's perception of people has very little to do with who those people actually are, and everything to do with how efficiently they satisfy emotional demand. Appreciation is replaced by evaluation. Relationships become unstable because acceptance is never unconditional. It is always up for renegotiation. Living inside that kind of environment leaves people feeling invisible. They start to internalize the belief that their worth depends entirely on what they can offer rather than on who they inherently are. Their emotions are ignored unless those emotions somehow serve the narcissist. Their achievements are acknowledged only when those achievements reflect well on the narcissist. Their struggles are brushed aside the moment they threaten to pull attention away from the narcissist's own priorities. Instead of feeling understood, valued, and accepted, they slowly begin to feel used, depleted, and cut off from their own sense of self. One of the most misunderstood aspects of narcissistic behavior is the sharp difference between understanding someone's emotions and actually caring about them. Many narcissists are remarkably skilled at reading emotional cues. They can sense when someone is happy, anxious, insecure, lonely, or hungry for approval. This talent often makes them seem emotionally intelligent, even perceptive, at first glance. They know exactly which words to use, which expressions to wear, which behaviors will build trust or admiration fastest, but reading someone's emotions is not the same as caring about their well-being. For the narcissist, that emotional awareness typically becomes a tool for influence rather than a foundation for compassion. This is why they might comfort someone specifically because it flatters their own image, offer support only when they expect admiration in return, or display generosity mainly when there's an audience watching. Their kindness tends to be conditional on whether it serves some personal purpose. When someone else's pain requires sacrifice, sustained accountability, or a consistent emotional presence without any personal reward attached, genuine concern tends to evaporate. Instead of asking how they might ease another person's suffering, the narcissist reflexively asks how the situation affects them, how it makes them look, or whether their own needs are still being met. This absence of emotional empathy creates wounds that are hard to name precisely because they leave no visible mark. A partner might share sadness only to watch the conversation pivot back toward the narcissist's own troubles. A child seeking comfort might instead be criticized for being too sensitive. A friend confiding disappointment might be met with comparisons that shrink their experience or advice that quietly redirects the spotlight. Over time, the people around a narcissist stop feeling emotionally safe because vulnerability is met not with understanding, but with indifference, judgment, or outright manipulation. What makes this even more damaging is how emotional confidences can later be weaponized. In a healthy relationship, fears and insecurities shared in trust deepen intimacy. With a narcissist, those same vulnerabilities can resurface later as ammunition during arguments, as tools of control, or as sources of humiliation. Someone's deepest fear can be exploited purely because it offers leverage. This teaches the people around them to hide their true feelings, to suppress their emotions, and to constantly monitor what they reveal, creating a relationship where openness feels dangerous and real closeness slowly withers away. One of the most disorienting patterns inside narcissistic relationships is the repeating cycle of idealization, devaluation, and discard. It typically begins with an intoxicating wave of attention that makes the other person feel uniquely seen, uniquely understood. The narcissist may shower them with compliments, affection, promises, and near constant communication, creating the illusion that they've finally found someone who truly gets them. This intensity can feel thrilling, even healing, because it appears to offer unconditional acceptance. In reality, though, the admiration is usually directed at an idealized fantasy version of the person, not the person as they actually are. For as long as that individual mirrors the narcissist's desires, reinforces their self-image, and supplies steady emotional validation, the relationship feels almost flawless. The second stage begins. The instant reality starts to intrude on the fantasy. No human being can perpetually satisfy another person's every emotional demand without ever expressing an opinion of their own, without setting a boundary, without showing a moment of weakness. The second the other person disagrees, asks for fairness, or fails to provide constant admiration, the narcissist's perception of them starts to shift, and small imperfections balloon into major flaws. Confidence gets relabeled as arrogance. Independence gets recast as disloyalty. Healthy boundaries get twisted into personal rejection. Rather than embracing the full complexity of another human being, the narcissist swings from seeing them as entirely wonderful to viewing them as a deep disappointment. As criticism grows more frequent, security gives way to confusion. The other person often works harder to reclaim the warmth of the beginning, convinced they must have done something to cause this shift. They apologize excessively. They abandon their own needs. They keep adjusting their behavior, hoping to restore what once felt like connection. Tragically, this effort rarely pays off because the standard keeps shifting beneath them. Approval becomes unpredictable, leaving the person trapped in an endless chase for validation that never fully returns. The final stage arrives once the relationship stops supplying the admiration, control, or emotional fuel the narcissist craves. They may withdraw emotionally, end things abruptly, replace the person with someone new, or keep them around only when it's convenient. The individual once treated as extraordinary is discarded as though they never mattered at all, leaving behind confusion, self-doubt, and unanswered questions that can take years to untangle. For most people, healthy relationships are built on trust, mutual respect, open communication, and the freedom to simply be themselves. A narcissist, however, tends to experience genuine emotional closeness as unpredictable and threatening because real intimacy demands equality, vulnerability, and acceptance of another person's independence. Since those very qualities feel like a threat to their need for superiority and control, they frequently replace connection with domination. Instead of earning loyalty through consistency and kindness, they attempt to secure it by managing how other people think, feel, and behave. Control becomes their substitute for emotional security, even though in the end it destroys the very relationships they claim to want to keep. This control rarely announces itself. It usually starts small, disguised as concern, advice, or affection. They might question who you spend time with, criticize your choices under the pretense of helping, or gradually nudge you toward relying on them more than anyone else in your life. At first, these behaviors can even feel like devotion, but slowly they begin to shrink your independence. You might notice yourself asking permission for things that used to be automatic, avoiding certain topics, or adjusting your own behavior just to keep the peace. What once felt like love quietly transforms into a system of emotional management where your sense of calm depends entirely on keeping the narcissist satisfied. When subtle influence stops being enough, more overt forms of control tend to surface. Guilt becomes a favorite weapon, making you feel selfish simply for having needs or setting limits. Fear shows up through anger, veiled threats, silent treatment, or unpredictable emotional outbursts that keep you constantly bracing for the next conflict. Confusion gets manufactured through denied statements, shifting expectations, or being blamed for problems you didn't create. Dependence deepens as you're gradually convinced that no one else could ever understand you, support you, or love you the way they claim to. Each tactic chips away at your confidence while tightening their grip. The longer this continues, the more a person's sense of self begins to dissolve. Decisions start being shaped by the need to avoid disapproval rather than by personal values or genuine happiness. Confidence gives way to constant self-monitoring, and emotional freedom is sacrificed for a fragile, temporary stability. Instead of a relationship where two people can grow safely together, it becomes a tightly managed environment where one person's hunger for power slowly overtakes the other's ability to think, choose, and live as themselves. One of the biggest misconceptions about narcissists is the assumption that they possess unshakable confidence. Their certainty, their ambition, their constant self-praise can make them seem emotionally armored, as though nothing could ever pierce their composure. But what looks like extraordinary confidence is often a carefully maintained shield protecting a surprisingly brittle sense of self-worth underneath. Their self-esteem isn't rooted in genuine self-acceptance. It's propped up almost entirely by external validation. They require admiration, recognition, success, or a sense of superiority just to feel emotionally stable. Take those sources of reinforcement away, and the carefully built image starts to crack, revealing insecurities they have worked tirelessly to conceal. Because their sense of worth depends so heavily on outside approval, even small challenges can register as existential threats. A minor disagreement, a piece of constructive feedback, or someone else's success can be interpreted as proof that they're losing status or relevance. Rather than weighing criticism objectively, they experience it as a direct attack on their identity, which explains why their reactions so often feel wildly disproportionate. A small correction can trigger sudden anger, defensiveness, mockery, or total emotional shutdown. Instead of asking whether the criticism holds any truth, they become consumed with repairing their damaged image as quickly as possible. To shield themselves from this discomfort, narcissists commonly lean on a familiar set of psychological defenses. They blame others for their own mistakes. They exaggerate their accomplishments. They minimize or dismiss the achievements of people around them. They surround themselves with people who reliably reinforce their sense of superiority. And if someone threatens that delicate balance by withholding admiration or by exposing an inconsistency, that person can suddenly become the target of criticism, humiliation, or exclusion. These reactions have little to do with real confidence. They're about preventing painful feelings of inadequacy from ever surfacing. Ironically, the more polished the appearance of superiority, the more fragile the foundation beneath it tends to be. Because their identity hinges on maintaining an illusion of perfection, they're forced to pour enormous emotional energy into defending it. Every interaction becomes another opportunity to prove their worth or dodge anything that might expose a weakness. Rather than experiencing the freedom that comes from accepting one's own imperfections, they remain trapped in an endless hunt for validation, guarding an image that can never deliver the lasting security they so desperately crave. The influence of a narcissist is almost never confined to a single relationship. Their emotional patterns ripple outward into every environment they enter, gradually reshaping the attitudes, behaviors, and well-being of everyone nearby. Whether it's a family, a workplace, a friend group, or a wider community, their relentless need for admiration, control, and superiority creates an atmosphere where everyone else starts adjusting their own behavior just to avoid conflict. Over time, the emotional temperature of the entire group starts revolving around one unpredictable person instead of shared respect and genuine cooperation. Within a family, this can leave lasting psychological scars. A parent with narcissistic tendencies might favor one child while relentlessly criticizing another, breeding rivalry instead of closeness. Siblings grow up chasing approval instead of building trust with one another. Family members learn to swallow their emotions because expressing disappointment or disagreement invites punishment, ridicule, or cold withdrawal. Conversations become carefully managed performances. Honesty starts to feel risky, and authentic affection is replaced by a kind of ongoing theater. Even decades later, adult children may still wrestle with self-worth, boundaries, or healthy intimacy because they learned early that love had to be earned rather than freely given. That same pattern shows up in workplaces. A narcissistic leader might take full credit for every success while pinning every failure on someone else, cultivating fear instead of motivation. Employees stop offering creative ideas because honest mistakes are punished far more harshly than outright dishonesty. Colleagues end up competing against one another for approval rather than collaborating toward shared goals. Gossip, favoritism, and simmering tension slowly crowd out genuine teamwork, and talented people either lose their confidence or walk away entirely. Productivity suffers not because people lack skill, but because emotional safety has quietly disappeared from the room. Friendships suffer under similar strain as trust erodes bit by bit. One person's constant need to dominate conversations, seek admiration, or manipulate group dynamics forces everyone else into roles that serve the narcissist's emotional appetite. Some friends become permanent cheerleaders. Others become convenient targets for criticism. Many eventually drift away, quietly protecting their own peace of mind. As these unhealthy dynamics spread, they shape not just individual relationships, but the entire culture of the group. Anxiety replaces openness, caution replaces authenticity, and people slowly start treating emotional instability as though it were simply a normal part of everyday life. The most devastating damage caused by narcissistic behavior is often the kind nobody else can see. A broken object can be replaced, a financial loss can sometimes be recovered, even a public argument eventually fades from memory. But the invisible wounds, the ones carried quietly inside a person's thoughts, emotions, and sense of self, often linger long after the relationship has ended. They slowly reshape how someone sees themselves in the world, making the destruction far deeper than most people ever recognize. Living alongside a narcissist often means existing in a constant state of emotional uncertainty. One day you feel cherished, the next you're criticized for the very traits that were praised only hours earlier. This whiplash creates confusion, causing people to distrust their own judgment instead of trusting their instincts. They replay conversations over and over, wondering whether they misunderstood, whether they somehow caused the conflict. Gradually, confidence gives way to chronic self-doubt, and decisions that once felt effortless become sources of anxiety because the person no longer trusts their own perception of reality. Another quiet casualty is emotional safety. Healthy relationships allow people to voice their fears, admit their mistakes, and reveal their vulnerabilities without fear of humiliation or rejection. Around a narcissist, openness starts to feel dangerous because personal struggles risk being dismissed, mocked, or stored away as future leverage. As a result, people stop sharing their true feelings. They become guarded, choosing their words with extreme care, constantly monitoring their own reactions. That self-protection might help them survive the relationship in the moment, but it also blocks genuine intimacy from forming with anyone else long after the relationship has ended. Perhaps the deepest wound of all is the slow erosion of identity. After years spent adapting to someone else's expectations, many people forget what they genuinely enjoy, believe, or value. Their choices become organized around avoiding criticism rather than pursuing purpose. Even once the narcissist is no longer physically present, that internalized voice of judgment often lingers, leaving them feeling as though they must continually earn love, approval, or acceptance just to exist safely. The greatest destruction, then, isn't always found in dramatic, headline-worthy endings. It's found in the quiet disappearance of confidence, authenticity, inner peace, and the basic ability to feel safe inside one's own mind. So when we ask why narcissists seem to leave devastation in their wake, the honest answer isn't simply that they enjoy causing pain. The deeper truth is this: a person who has never built a secure, honest relationship with themselves will always struggle to build a secure relationship with anyone else. When protecting an image becomes more important than protecting people, trust starts to vanish. When control replaces genuine connection, love curdles into fear. When admiration becomes a requirement rather than a gift freely given, every relationship is quietly converted into a transaction rather than a bond. The real tragedy is that the deepest damage is almost never visible to an outside observer. It lives in the person who no longer trusts their own judgment, in the child who grows up believing love must always be earned, in the partner who apologizes simply for existing, in the employee who eventually stops sharing their ideas, in the friend who slowly forgets what genuine respect actually feels like. These invisible wounds spread quietly, shaping lives long after the narcissist has walked out of the room. Understanding these patterns isn't about slapping a label on every difficult person you meet or responding with bitterness and hostility. It's about learning to recognize unhealthy dynamics before they become normalized, protecting your emotional well-being without abandoning your own compassion. It's about remembering that empathy without boundaries eventually curdles into self-sacrifice. The strongest response to narcissistic behavior was never revenge, and it was never endless argument. It is clarity. It is emotional awareness. It is firm, healthy boundaries. And it is the quiet courage to walk away from relationships that demand you abandon your authentic self in exchange for someone else's approval. Because in the end, the healthiest people aren't the ones who win every battle for attention, power, or admiration. They are the ones who build environments where honesty feels safe, where respect flows in both directions, where empathy is real rather than performed, and where every person is valued not for what they can provide, but simply for who they are. If any part of this resonated with an experience you've lived through, take a moment to sit with that recognition. Naming a pattern is often the first real step toward reclaiming your own peace, your own voice, and your own sense of what a genuinely safe relationship should feel like. Healing doesn't require you to fully understand every motive behind someone else's behavior. It only requires you to trust what you have felt, to honor what you have seen, and to give yourself permission to walk toward relationships built on something sturdier than performance, relationships built on truth.